Orcs aren't just an army. They are a walking, screaming disaster of green muscle and bad ideas. The Imperium has tried to burn them, break them, and wipe them out, but it never matters. They don't fight for power or survival, they fight because it's fun. And no matter how many you kill, there are always more, louder, meaner, and ready to start the next big war. Orcs aren't just warriors, they are biological war machines, designed for destruction by an ancient race long since turned to dust. Created during the war in heaven by the Old Ones, orcs were engineered to fight without end, and despite the passage of millions of years, they've never stopped. They reproduce through spores that are shed from their bodies after they die, meaning that even when wiped out, their numbers constantly replenish, often in places their enemies least expect. This ensures orcs always have the reinforcements they need, with new warriors and workers emerging with the knowledge of how to do their jobs already in their brains. Socially, orcs follow one rule: might makes right. The biggest, strongest orc is the leader, until someone bigger knocks him down. They use their teeth or teeth as currency since they grow back fast, meaning even the economy is based on violence, and every orc craves more daka. More firepower, more noise, more fun, essentially. Most belong to clans like the speed-obsessed Evil Sons or the brutal up-close Goths. Others join looser cults, united by a shared love of speed, flames, or explosions. But no matter their colors or weapons, orcs are all bound by the same thing: the Wa, an instinctive, unstoppable drive to gather, fight, and destroy. They aren't just a species, they are a rolling avalanche of green, and the galaxy's been trying to survive them ever since. Orc society stands on a foundation of violence, instinct, and sheer biological absurdity. But beneath it all, holding the whole mess together, are Squigs. These little monsters are more than just battlefield pests. They're living tools, weapons, and livestock that keep orc civilization running. Most Squigs are little more than walking mouths with legs, and their most common battlefield role is to charge ahead of the main assault, detonating mines, drawing fire, or simply biting anything in their way. But orcs have a habit of breeding Squigs into whatever they need, intentionally or not. Some grow oversized eyes to help their owners aim, others bloat with acid or explosives to be hurled as living ammunition, but for every Squig designed to kill, there are dozens more that exist purely to keep orc society running. Oily Squigs keep their machines from falling apart, paint Squigs smear war paint across their warbands, some function as crude syringes for mad docs, while others grow into hair-like tendrils to give orcs their signature top knots. There are Squigs that scream and shriek to make orc music, and of course, edible Squigs, which make up a sizable part of the orc diet. Some Squigs have gone completely feral, turning into untamed beasts. There are Squig hawks in the skies, Squig sharks lurking in alien oceans, and massive Squig hogs and Squigosaurs used as mounts by particularly reckless orcs. And towering above all of them are titanic Squigoths, lumbering war beasts used as living battering rams. It's easy to think of Squigs as just weird alien animals, but they're more than that. Grown from the same spores as the orcs themselves, they are as much a part of the green tide as the warriors they serve. Without Squigs, orc society wouldn't just struggle, it would collapse entirely. Just above the Squigs on the orc hierarchy sit the Snotlings and Gretchen, though calling them above is generous. In a might makes right society, being small and physically weedy means that these two types of greenskins will never be bosses in their own right, but although both are weaker and scrawnier than true orcs, they play a vital role in keeping the green war machine running. Snotlings are the lowest of the low, barely sentient and utterly helpless without larger orcs to bully them into usefulness. Individually, they're little more than pests, but in swarms, they have use, tending to the fungus farms that provide orcs with more food, fuel, and intoxicants, or being used as ammunition in particularly cruel games of target practice. They are too dim-witted for battlefield roles beyond cleaning up and carrying off anything valuable while running underfoot and getting squashed, but that doesn't stop particularly unhinged orcs from throwing them at enemies just to see what happens. Gretchen or Grots are a different story. Though still weak by orc standards, they're much smarter than their brutish overlords, compensating for their lack of strength with low cunning and survival instincts. They serve as mechanics, assistants, and most commonly, cannon fodder, shoved into battle ahead of the main orc force to absorb bullets, clear mines, or distract the enemy alongside the squig herds. But their smarts mean they're also natural thieves, saboteurs, and even traitors, often scamming bigger orcs out of their loot when they're not being kicked around. Some particularly bold grots even dream of freedom, leading revolts like the infamous Grot Revolution, though these rebellions rarely last long before an angry warboss puts them back in their place. Still, for all their grumbling, Gretchen are as much a part of orc society as any Nob or warboss. They may be at the bottom of the pile, but without them, the whole ramshackle engine of orc civilization would grind to a halt. And if a few of them get eaten by a squig along the way, well, that's just the way of things. No matter how big the WoW gets, no matter how many cobbled together death machines they roll out, at its core, every orc army is a tidal wave of muscle, crude weapons, and unshakable enthusiasm for a good scrap. And that's exactly what the Boyz are. Hulking, axe-swinging, shoot-a-blasting brutes who live for the sheer joy of battle. The orc boy is as close to a standard orc as you can get. On average, they stand about 2 meters or 6 foot 6 inches tall, although, as we said earlier, orcs grow depending on their importance, so that is just an average. These hooligans have tough green skin like all their cousins and are marked by their hunched posture, gigantic muscles, and heavy lower jaws filled with shark teeth and tusks. Orc boys gather in mobs of around 10 to 20 similarly equipped lads, usually led by the biggest and meanest of their number, and charge headfirst at whatever unlucky enemy happens to be in front of them. They might not be the best marksmen, but what they lack in accuracy they make up for with volume. Hence the orc motto, more Daka, and if Daka doesn't do the job, their choppas will. There's no grand strategy at play here, just an unstoppable instinct to fight, and that's often all the plan they need. But orcs aren't just reckless brawlers. Some of them figure out that extra armor helps you survive longer, leading to the rise of the Oddboyz, tougher, better equipped fighters who stomp into battle clad in scavenged metal plates. Then there are the Burnaboyz, who embrace a simpler truth. Everything burns. Armed with crude but devastating flamethrowers, they torch everything from enemy infantry to battlefield fortifications, laughing uncontrollably the whole time. Tank Bustas, on the other hand, have a one-track mind. Whether it's a battle tank or a massive titan, these orcs dedicate their lives to blowing up the biggest, toughest vehicles they can find. Armed with rockets, bombs, and an unhealthy obsession with things that go boom, they charge straight at their armored prey with very little thought of their own safety, let alone anyone else's. And then there are the Stormboyz, the strangest of the lot. Unlike most orcs who love chaotic brawls, Stormboyz take a more disciplined approach, drilling in tight formations and even saluting their bosses. Of course, the discipline is relative since they do strap massive rocket packs to their backs and launch themselves headfirst into battle, often exploding on impact. But Boyz are the backbone of every WoW, loud, choppy, and too dumb to quit. When the biggest mob brings the loudest guns, that's usually the one still standing, and the Boyz wouldn't have it any other way. Some Boyz are so specialized that they deserve their own entry, and the Lootaz are certainly the first ones that come to mind. For them, every battlefield is a treasure trove of scrap, weapons, and half-destroyed vehicles just waiting to be claimed. They are the scavengers of orc society, stripping down anything they can get their hands on and welding it back together into something loud, deadly, and completely ramshackle. Lootaz are obsessed with firepower, and thanks to their love of borrowing the biggest guns they can find, they are some of the most heavily armed orcs outside of a warboss's retinue. Their signature weapon is the Def Gun, a massive, unwieldy firearm cobbled together from looted enemy technology, spare orc parts, and whatever else they think looks shooty enough. These guns vary wildly in function and reliability, but if there's one thing that's guaranteed, it's that they will spit out an absurd amount of Daka when fired. Whether it's a repurposed heavy bolter, an old las cannon barely held together with scrap metal, or something so jury-rigged that even mech boys aren't sure how it works, a Lootaz gun is always devastating. The thrill of looting isn't just about getting a bigger gun, it's about the process. Lootaz don't just take weapons, they take pride in their work, customizing their arsenal with anything they can steal. If a Lootaz sees a tank on the battlefield, he doesn't think about blowing it up, he thinks about how he can drag it back to the workshop and bolt its main gun onto his def gun. It doesn't always work, and sometimes the whole thing explodes in his hands, but that's just part of the fun. Their scavenger instincts don't stop at weapons either. Anything not nailed down, and some things that are, will inevitably end up in the Lootaz hands, from helmets and armor plates to enemy insignias worn as trophies. Even friendly orcs aren't safe. If a Lootaz thinks another orc's Shuda looks better than his, he'll acquire it in the confusion of battle. And while other orcs might see them as a bit too sneaky for comfort, no warband can deny the raw firepower that Lootaz bring to the battlefield. When a mob of Lootaz sets up and starts unloading, it's like an orc artillery barrage on legs. Wildly inaccurate, devastatingly powerful, and leaving behind a battlefield littered with new scrap for them to collect. For most orcs, speed is just a means to an end, an easy way to close the distance and get to the fight. But for the maniacs known as speed freaks, going fast is the whole point. These orcs belong to the infamous cult of speed, a loose collection of boys obsessed with velocity, loud engines, and high-octane destruction. To them, Daka and speed go hand in hand, and a proper battle should be more of a high-speed demolition derby than a traditional fight. Speed freaks aren't a separate breed of orc, just boys who've caught the speed bug, and once they do, there's no going back. They live to burn across the battlefield in a blur of smoke, fire, and deafening roars using whatever ramshackle vehicles they can get their hands on. Some become biker boys, tearing through enemy lines on oversized, barely functional warbikes, leaving only a trail of wreckage and bullet casings in their wake. Others mount up in trucks, open-topped death traps packed with boys who unload their Shudas at anything that moves while their driver smashes straight into enemy formations. Then there are the flyboys, whose addiction to speed takes them into the skies. These orcs strap themselves into jets and aircraft cobbled together from scrap, held aloft by crude orc engineering and sheer willpower. Their Daka jets streak through the sky in wild dogfights while Blitza bombers dive straight into enemy ranks with explosives strapped to their bellies, eager to turn themselves into the loudest, most spectacular explosion possible. Speed freaks fight like they drive, full throttle and out of control. They hit the enemy before they know what's happening, and by the time the smoke clears, they're already gone. In the end, speed kills, and no one's faster than a speed freak. Up until now, we've shown how most orcs are perfectly happy slapping scrap metal together and riding into battle on ramshackle vehicles. But even among the orcs, there are traditionalists. These are the beast Snaggas, a subculture of orcs who believe the best way to fight isn't with clanking machines, but with raw muscle and the biggest, meanest beasts they can wrangle. They see themselves as tougher, stronger, and more brutal than their more mech-obsessed kin, closer to the old ways of orc warfare when their ancestors fought with nothing but crude weapons, raw aggression, and a proper-sized war beast underneath them. You can always tell a beast Snagga boy from other orc boys. A lifetime of challenging themselves by hunting huge, dangerous beasts with nothing but crude weaponry makes the average beast Snagga larger and stronger than their cousins. Not proper Nobz yet, but definitely closer, and that's just the ones on foot. The Squig boys charge into battle atop massive four-legged squigs with thick hides, powerful jaws, and enough brute strength to plow through enemy lines. These savage riders favor brutal melee combat, hurling barbed spears or swinging massive choppas as their squigs rip and tear into anything in their path. The Squig themselves are little more than barely trained monsters, but under the control of a Snagga, they become devastating shock cavalry. But orcs have been riding into battle long before Squig became popular. Back on feral orc worlds, where technology is scarce, orcs still ride into battle on the backs of giant war-hardened boars. While Squig are all raw muscle, boars are faster and more nimble, making boar boys surprisingly quick for an orc cavalry unit. Though they've mostly been replaced by bikes and trucks in mainstream orc warbands, there are still plenty of orcs who swear by the old ways. Orcs aren't exactly known for subtlety. When a warband goes to battle, they charge in head first, guns blazing, yelling loud enough to shake the battlefield. Even Lootaz only sneak for as long as it takes to get a good bit of scrap or to set up a firing position for their massive guns. But every once in a while, an orc gets the ridiculous idea that sneaking around might actually be useful. These are the Kommandoz, orc infiltration specialists, saboteurs, and the closest thing the greenskins have to an elite stealth unit. That doesn't mean they're good at sneaking, mind you. Most Kommandoz still think their massive frames and loud guttural breathing don't count if they slap some mud on their face and wear a pair of stolen goggles. But compared to the average orc who announces his arrival by firing a gun in the air and screaming at the top of his lungs, a commando might as well be a ghost. And that little edge in subtlety makes them wildly effective. Kommandoz specialize in ambushes, flanking maneuvers, and demolitions. They sneak ahead of the main WA, planting explosives, sabotaging enemy defenses, and striking from the shadows before the enemy even knows they're there. They're also some of the few orcs that actually think before a fight, planning out their strikes in a way that often surprises Imperial tacticians. Some even learn a bit of patience, though that usually just means waiting an extra 10 seconds before kicking in the door and unloading a slugga into the nearest enemy. Their gear is a mix of stolen tech, looted explosives, and whatever crazy gadgets their local mech thought would be funny to strap to them. Some Kommandoz wield oversized silencers that somehow make their guns even louder. Others carry grappling hooks, night vision goggles, or crude choppas wrapped in black rags because they heard that makes them stealthy. A few even use grot spotters, unlucky Gretchen forced to sneak ahead and point out targets assuming they don't get shot first. But no matter how much sneaking they do, a commando is still an orc. The second they decide the time is right, all that stealth training goes out the window, and the battlefield erupts in an explosion of bullets, shrapnel, and very loud yelling. And in the end, that's what makes them truly dangerous. Not that they can be sneaky, but that they choose to be, just long enough to make their enemies nervous. Most orcs don't bother thinking too hard about how things work. As long as their shooters fire, their choppas are sharp, and their trucks go fast, they are happy. But some orcs get a peculiar itch in their brain, an instinctive knack for doing things that other orcs just can't. These are the Oddboyz, the eccentric specialists who keep orc society running, whether the rest of the boys realize it or not. Mech boys are the engineers, if you can call them that. They don't study technology so much as remember it, drawing on half-forgotten knowledge that must have been shoved in their heads generations ago, a trait that all Oddboyz seem to share. With enough scrap, a mech can build anything: guns, vehicles, force fields, even war machines rivaling Imperial Titans. The fact that they barely understand how any of it works does not seem to matter. If enough orcs believe something will function, then somehow it just does. Painboys, on the other hand, are the so-called doctors of orc society, and their methods are exactly as horrifying as you would expect. They patch up wounded orcs with whatever parts they have on hand, sometimes even extra parts, just to see what happens. If a boy loses an arm, the Painboy might replace it with a bigger, shootier arm, or maybe just another orc's arm that was lying around. Their surgical philosophy is simple. If the patient gets back up and starts fighting again, that's a job well done. If they don't, well, at least the Painboy learned something. Runt herds are the closest thing to managers that orcs have, overseeing the lowest castes of greenskins, Snotlings, Gretchen, and Squigs. They make sure the little runts stay in line, usually with liberal use of a big stick, a squig prod, or whatever happens to be lying around. Despite being some of the roughest Oddboyz around, runt herds are marked by their patience and have a strange sort of fondness for their grots, even if that affection is mostly expressed through yelling and casual violence. It's possible that runt herds are part of a hereditary line of orcs, just like mechs and painboys, who have a specialized role passed down through genetic knowledge, especially since they all seem to have instinctual memory of their race's most important stories. Of course, not every Oddboy is essential to war. There are brewboys to keep the fungus beer flowing, ensuring orcs always have something to swig between fights. sloppers churn out whatever counts as food in orc society, usually some mix of squigs, spores, and whatever they found behind the nearest battlefield. But importantly, sloppers are always trying to top other cooks by making the spiciest, most risky food possible for the lads to enjoy. Neither the Brewboys nor the sloppers are as respected as mechs, docs, or runtherds, but they are still Oddboyz, and in orc society, everyone has a role to play, whether they know it or not. Weirdboyz aren't just the strangest of the Oddboyz, they are the most dangerous. Not to the enemy necessarily, but to themselves and every orc standing too close. See, orcs generate a constant psychic field, a raw storm of Wa energy that grows stronger the more of them there are. Most boys don't even notice it, but Weirdboyz feel it, all of it coursing through their thick skulls. The more orcs around, the more power a Weirdboy absorbs, until it has to go somewhere. When they manage to direct it, they can unleash devastating bursts of energy, green lightning that arcs across the battlefield, heads exploding like overripe squigs, or even the sheer undeniable force of the Wa manifesting as reality-breaking phenomena. When they fail to direct it, well, that's when Weirdboyz go pop instead, and since orcs never do anything small, this often results in a huge crater and most of the orc army evaporating. Because of this, orcs treat their Weirdboyz with a mix of fear and superstition. They're kept at the fringes of the warbands, herded into battle by minders, unlucky orcs whose job is to keep the Weirdboy from frying their own side before they can fry the enemy. And yet, for all the risks, Weirdboyz are essential. In the largest Was, their power reaches impossible heights, turning them into living conduits of orc belief. They can summon devastating storms, teleport entire mobs across the battlefield, or even in the most extreme cases, bend reality itself to the orcs' collective will. Weirdboyz are usually understandably afraid of their own power. After all, it makes them an outcast among their own people. You don't see a Weirdboy having an honest brawl or a fungus beer with the lads. But some Weirdboyz decided to lean into their powers, enjoying the sensation of the Wa energy building inside them, and of the sheer destruction they can rain down on anyone who gets in their way. Okay, we're done with the many flavors of boys, and now we are on to what they're all trying to become: a Nob. If the average orc is a walking, yelling, battle-crazed slab of muscle, then a Nob is all of that cranked up to 11. These are the biggest, meanest boys in any given mob, the ones who are tougher, fight harder, and have bullied their way to the top, growing physically larger the whole time. A Nob isn't just an elite fighter, they are a leader by orc standards, keeping their mobs in line with a mix of brute force and loud threats. But not all Nobz are happy to just boss boys around. Some take their status to the next level, arming themselves with the best weapons, the biggest armor, or the most excessive cybernetic upgrades. Take the Flash Gits. These swaggering show-offs modify their weapons until they're barely recognizable, carrying the biggest, loudest, most over-engineered shooters they can afford. They don't want to just kill the enemy, they want to look good doing it, with guns that spew more Daka than should be physically possible, and wardrobes that put even the wealthiest bad moons to shame. Their obsession with firepower often makes them more mercenary than most orcs, hiring themselves out to any warband that promises the most loot. Then there's the Cyborgs, Nobz who took one too many hits to the head and figured that replacing their broken bits with scrap metal was a brilliant idea. Some of them have crude bionic limbs, others have entire steel-plated bodies, and a few are more machine than orc. But not all of them choose this path. Cyborgs are often the unlucky volunteers for a Mad Doc's latest experiment, stitched together with whatever spare parts were lying around. The end result is rarely pretty, but a cyborg's willingness to keep fighting long after their body should have given up makes them a terrifying sight on the battlefield. And then there are the Mega Nobz, Nobz who decided that being big wasn't enough, they had to be unstoppable. Regular orcs might enjoy the reckless thrill of battle, but Mega Nobz prefer to walk through it as an unbreakable wall of steel, encased in towering suits of power armor, which are as strong as Astartes' Terminator plate despite the ramshackle appearance. They wade through enemy fire like it's nothing, crushing anything too slow to get out of their way. If a Mega Nob gets into melee, it's not a fight, it's a demolition job. No matter what kind of nob they are, one thing is certain. These orcs are bigger, badder, and bossier than the boys they command, and just like any orc in the mobs beneath them, nobs aren't content to stay in their place forever. They've always got their eyes on something bigger, and the second a warboss shows weakness, they are always ready to throw down a challenge for the top spot. At the very top of the orc food chain stands the warboss, the biggest, meanest, and most dangerous orc in any given warband. If orc society is built on might makes right, then the warboss is the living proof of that law, because he's the one who proved he was the toughest by caving in the skulls of anyone who said otherwise. A warboss isn't just strong, he's commanding. Other orcs follow him not out of loyalty, but because he's simply too terrifying to disobey. He yells the loudest, fights the hardest, and is always looking for the next scrap, which means his boys are never bored. And when a warboss gets going, he doesn't just start a battle, he starts a war. Wars are the orc equivalent of a full-scale invasion, except with less strategy and way more momentum. They start as a simple warband, then snowball into something bigger as more orcs are drawn to the fight, driven by sheer instinct and a psychic energy that builds up whenever enough of them gather in one place. Given enough time, a war can grow into a galaxy-shaking tide of destruction, and it all happens because one particularly massive warboss pointed in a direction and said, "Oi, that way." And while all warbosses are massive, brutal, and utterly single-minded in their thirst for conquest, a great warboss is something even deadlier. The best of them, like the infamous Ghazghkull Thraka, aren't just bigger than the rest, they're actually clever. They understand in their own brutal way how to keep a war going for years, even decades, and when one of these legendary warbosses rises, the galaxy takes notice. But no warboss rules forever. Orcs aren't loyal in the traditional sense. The second a warboss starts losing, his own nobs start eyeing the throne. And when the challenges come, there's only ever one winner. The war stops for no orc. If a warboss gets knocked off his perch, then the one who did the knocking becomes the next warboss. Because in the end, orcs only follow one rule. The biggest orc is the boss, until a bigger one comes along. The green tide is a wild thing to try and cover in one discussion, and we must have touched on half a dozen other subjects that really require more looking into. The orcs are such an integral part of the 40k story that it's impossible to think of the grim darkness of the far future without them. But what do you all think? Did our breakdown of the lads make you want more? Would you like to talk about the clans and subcultures, or maybe a breakdown of some of the largest orc empires to ever exist? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button on your way out, or the Nobz will give you all a proper kickin' on behalf of the warboss. More lore.